Member Boak, Board Member Srinivasan, and myself, Board Member Nguyen, are present. During closed session, we'll be discussing student discipline issues related to student suspension, student expulsion, or student expulsion readmits. We'll also be having a conference with our negotiator in regards to CSEA, CTAB, Teamsters Local 150, and management. We'll also be discussing any public employee discipline, dismissal, or release issues. There are no public comments on closed session items, so at this time, we will now adjourn to closed session at 6 o'clock p.m. Thank you. We will now re-adjourn back to open session at 7:39 p.m. Trustee Srinivasan, can you lead us in the flag salute, please? Sure. Thank you for that. And Trustee Boyd, can you lead us in the district mission statement?
Yes. Berryessa Union School District provides all students the skills to become lifelong learners and successful 21st century global citizens.
Thank you. And Trustee Jimenez, can you lead us in the norms of the Board of Trustees?
Yes, the norms of the board. The Berryessa Union School District Board of Trustees agree to focus on the best interest of students at all times, be respectful, listen openly, address problems and process, not persons, keep each other informed, maintain confidentiality, work toward the future, learn from the past, equal participation from all members, stay on task.
Thank you for that. And there was no action taken during closed session. Now, is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. That's 5-0. We will now move on to item 7. Are there any public comments on consent calendar agenda items? If there is none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion on the consent calendar?
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved and adopted. I'm sorry, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. We will now move on to comments from the public on non-agenda items. If there are no comments, we'll go ahead and move on to our first report of the night. Dr. Fuentes, can you introduce 10A?
Yes, thank you. This evening, I would like to welcome Tom Williams of Enrollment Projection Consultants, EPC. He comes each year to provide us an update regarding our enrollment projections and all the movement that's happening around the Berryessa community. Thank you, Tom. We welcome you to our meeting this evening. Tom, I'm going to stop you for 1 second. I'm not sure if your mic is working. Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely, every time. There you go.
Thank you. Does it work now?
Good.
Okay. There's 4 grades I'm going to focus on this table before I get to the bottom line numbers, and that's TK and K, but first of all, 5th and 8th. Back from 2016 to 2018, you had amounts in the 800s in 8th grade and amounts in the 700s in 5th grade. So just graduating those 8th grade amounts out and those 5th grade amounts in caused significant middle school decline. Then by the time we got to 2019 to 2021, you had amounts in the 700s in 8th grade, but you started getting amounts in the 600s in 5th grade. So again, just the rolling out of those numbers, 700s going out, 600s coming in, was causing a middle school decline. And that's why from 2016 to 2019, there down at the bottom, you'll see that you lost more students at the middle school level than actually the elementary level, despite having only half as many grades, 229 versus 210. At the same time, the reason the elementary numbers were going down was because in kindergarten, you had amounts in the 700s that then fell into the 600s. At the same time, amounts that were slightly larger were graduating from 5th grade. So that caused both grade levels to be going down, but more significantly on a per grade basis at the middle school level. Since 2019, both grade levels have lost significant student numbers, much more so in the past. But you'll notice that the elementary amount increased by essentially 2.5 times, whereas the middle school amount less than doubled. Nonetheless, on a per grade basis, it was more significant at the middle school level. Again, if you look in 8th grade, you're seeing amounts in 700s versus amounts in 600s in the 5th grade. What changed last year was for the first time we had a smaller amount in 8th grade than we had in 5th grade. And that's a significant factor. And that's the yellow highlighted 688 and 653. That's the first time in a long, long time that you actually had more kids in 5th grade than 8th grade. And so just rolling those amounts forward gave you 697 in 6th grade this year. And that's a significant chunk of why you grew at the middle school level. You notice for next year, we've got another small 8th grade, and that's why I don't have a decline for next year at the middle school level. What also happened uniquely at the middle school level this year is you gained from 5th to 6th and from 6th to 7th and from 7th to 8th, which you hadn't done also in quite a long time. So there was trends that really changed the middle school level compared to the recent past and even compared to my projections that I wasn't expecting. However, at the elementary level, if you look at the beige highlighted kindergarten figures, you went from the 700s from 2016 to 2019, the 600s in 2020 and 21 to the 500s since then. That's a huge plummet. At the same time, TK prior to this year went from the 140s to the 110s. So you were having significantly lower numbers coming in at the bottom end. And the reason you had any gain at the elementary level this year was because of the big increase in TK. A big chunk of reason for it was because you went from 5 months of eligibility, birth eligibility, to 9 months of birth eligibility. Obviously, that's not going to be repeated. You're not going to be able to gain another 4 months because you already have 9 months eligible. So going forward, we have, you'll see later, smaller birth numbers and smaller kindergarten numbers, which means also on a per month basis, birth month basis, the TK numbers will go down as well. So even though we'll expand to 12 months of birth eligibility after next year, we also have smaller numbers of kids coming up in that amount. So the reasons that you gained at the elementary level this year are essentially erased after this year. Does that make sense to everybody? Next slide, please. Okay, going forward, top row, you'll see we've got 665 again in 5th and 637th and 8th. So that's why for next year, I've got a 21 student gain. You see down there in the bottom yellow at the middle school level, simply because we've got a bigger amount coming in from 5th. That's the last time we have that happen. In 1 year, 2026, we have essentially the same amount. In all other forecast years, we have a much larger amount graduating from 8th than coming in from 5th. Well, I shouldn't say much larger amount, a slightly larger amount. But the trends to the grades now appear to be picking up some kids from 5th to 6th and 6th to 7th, 7th to 8th. That's why I have a very small loss at the middle school level going forward, despite having some larger amounts. The only real significant loss at the middle school level is when the current 6th graders graduate from 8th in 3 years, excuse me. The big difference, what's happening in these numbers is what's down in K. This is based on trends in your neighborhoods and especially the birth data. You'll see that whereas before we were talking about kindergarten numbers in the 700s a few years ago, I'm now projecting amounts in the 400s. That is a monumental shift. So as low as the current numbers are, after next year, they're going to be even lower. And TK grows a little bit because you expand to 12 months, but also with smaller numbers coming in at the kindergarten level, that means there's always obviously less TK students on a per month basis at the TK level. Does that make sense to everybody? Bottom line is I'm projecting significant losses at the elementary level, totaling about 700 kids in 5 years, and only about 77 kids at the middle school level in 5 years. The shift is totally to the elementary level, and it's all based on what's going on in kindergarten in particular. Next slide, please. Okay. As you've heard me say before, well, maybe Jiraiya hasn't, but everybody else has heard me say a million times before, all of my analyses are based on where your students live, by housing type, by general price range, et cetera. Not because I care if a kid is rich or poor, but because I'm trying to understand where the changes are happening or not happening, and then evaluate the likelihood for those trends to continue. And in your district, the places that had new housing going on, not only in the last year, but in the previous 3 or 4 years, still some trends of gaining kids. That's Vincy Park and Northwood. The entire rest of the district is in decline. And in the areas, as you'll see in a slide in a minute, the areas that have the more affordable housing are in the more severe decline. Because of that, in the last year, on that column on the left, you'll see Northwood added 39 K5, this excludes TK, added 39 kids living in its attendance area in the elementary grades. Vincy Park added 36. But we had Brooktree lose 51 or more than 10%. We had Majestic Way lose 33. And Toyon I highlighted in 20, even though it's not officially 25 amount, because that's almost 10% of the kids in Toyon as well. So we had some significant losses going in, particularly in the most affordable parts of the district, but also in existing housing as a whole in the district. And the only place you're gaining at all was where the new housing has been located in the last couple of years. Going forward, again, we still have more new housing going on in Northwood. We have a little bit going on in Summerdale the next couple of years. So Summerdale has essentially no loss. Northwood has more of a gain, and the rest all losses. And some of those losses, based on what I'm expecting in kindergarten compared to what it's graduating from 5th grade, living in those attendance areas of your kids, we got losses of 40 for Brooktree, 47 for Laneview, 65 for Majestic Way, 58 for Ruskin, and 34 for Noble just in the next 2 years. And again, that's big 5th grades going out and small kindergartens coming in. I want to point out one thing about Northwood. Because the attendance boundary changed 3 years ago between Northwood, Brooktree, and Laneview, you had a lot of kids grandfathered at Northwood. Many of those kids have graduated out. Now we're down to just a net gain of 27 kids at Northwood from the grandfathered kids. Well, those will be graduating out in the next 2 years. So even though I'm projecting a resident student gain of 41 kids, in terms of the attendance at Northwood, it may be a wash with the loss of the net gain of kids graduating out. Does that make sense to everybody? You following me? Okay. Right now, in grades 4 and 5 in particular, we have kids grandfathered, and I think everybody knows what grandfather means, still at Northwood because they were already enrolled at Northwood when we made the attendance boundary change. The next 2 years, that net gain at 27 is going to go away. So even though I'm having 41 more kids living in the Northwood attendance area in 2 years, it's almost a wash from what might be the enrollment at Northwood. Everybody following me on that? So I'm not worried about that gain at Northwood. I'm more worried about the losses in some of the other attendance areas. One last thing to comment, which you all know, you've got some magnet programs, particularly Cherrywood's Mandarin dual immersion program. So its numbers are actually, majority of its kids come from outside its attendance area. And because those kids come from outside its attendance area, obviously the attendance areas that those kids came out of show a net loss in the intra-district patterns. Next slide, please. Okay, at the middle school level, again, the only new housing recently has been the Morrill attendance area, so it had growth this year by 59 kids, got some more projected growth in the next 2 years. And the other two attendance areas have a modest amount of decline forecast in the next 2 years. Again, this is a huge shift from the trend in the past. Last year, from 2 years ago to last year, for example, all three of those attendance areas lost significant student numbers. But that's bottoming out now. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, I do all my analyses based on where your kids live. I have records of your kids going back to 2001 by each of these housing types and general income levels. And this table has been split into 3 parts, but I'll just summarize real quickly. The more affordable attached housing, meaning apartments, condos, townhouses, and plexes, has had the more significant losses, especially at the lowest grades. And the next most affordable category, the more affordable detached homes, also had significant losses, especially in the lowest grades. The places where you were basically stabilized in K2 this year were the more expensive housing categories. And to display that, in this first category, you'll see that in the last 3 years in K2, these units lost 61 kids out of a total that's only in the 260s. And that's a significant percentage loss in K2. And in the last year alone, it lost 25. So it went down by 11% in the last year and 22% in the last 3 years of kids in K2 in just this housing category. That's a significant loss in 3 years' time and a significant loss in 1 year's time. When I get into the upgrade attached, which are mainly townhouses and some duets, more expensive housing, that lost 97 over the last 3 years, but only one of that 97 occurred in the last year in K2. Does everybody see where I am on the table? So the net difference in the last year is actually 0% at K2. It's stabilizing at a lower level, but nonetheless stabilizing, unlike in the more affordable units. Next slide, please. When we get into the more affordable detached homes, again, you lost 146, but out of a much larger number than the apartments. You fell from 920 to 619 over the last 7 years, but most of that fall from 920 actually occurred before the pandemic hit. And that was, again, I think, as I've said before, related to the price of housing. It's just hard for the more affordable housing types had moderate income families, and it's very hard now for moderate income families to move into those units at the current prices. So you already had a significant decline going on before the pandemic hit, but it got really bad since then too. You dropped from 825 to 765, and in the last year you lost another 79 students in K2, or again 11%. So the more affordable housing in the district is where you're getting the bigger hit in K2, both recently and going forward in the forecast. When I get into what I call the middle income detached housing, it lost 72 kids in K2 in the last 3 years, but only 7 of that was in the last year. Next slide, please. And when I get to the more expensive housing, you actually had a nominal net gain in K2 in the most expensive housing in the last year. So it's basically, in the last couple of years, you've had the declines going on in TK8 across the board, but in K2, it's been concentrated in your most affordable housing. And that has comparable impacts on the attendance areas where that housing is concentrated. Next slide, please. Okay. These are what I call cumulative advancement rates. You've heard me discuss this before. This is evaluating the grade-to-grade trends as they accumulate. How many kids in kindergarten from an existing housing neighborhood were in first grade the next year, and second grade the year after that, and third grade the year after that. And I evaluate how they evolve through the pattern. And what has happened in all of the districts I did data for, 20 plus, is everybody had the rates go just plummet during the pandemic for obvious reasons. And we went, if you look in the rightmost colored column, your relatively affordable and intermediate attached from 2016 to 2019 actually gained kids as they graduated up from first grade to 8th grade. Nominally, but they gained kids, and they were actually higher than was happening in other districts in general. During the pandemic, it went from 1.03 to 0.58 and 0.55. It halved. In other words, half those kids were going to be gone between first grade and 8th grade if those rates had continued over a 7-year period. This year, it bounced all the way back up to 1.14. It's just an anomaly, I think, based on you lost so many kids during the pandemic that a few of them coming back caused an abnormal rate this year. I point this out because it tells me really the most accurate rates to consider going forward are actually the ones all the way back from 2016 to 2019. The rates that happened in the years since then were so erratic that they're unlikely to be repeated in the future. Same thing goes for upgrade attached. It went from 0.74 down to 0.42, bounced it back up to 0.8. You'll see the when I get down into even the middle income SFD, it fell from 1.0 to 0.81 and back up to 1.2. So again, I think the rates from 2016 to 2019, with some modification of what happened last year, are the more accurate rates to apply to the forecast. Does that make sense to everybody? And again, that's a judgment call. I've never done this I've been doing this since 85, and I've never been dealing with a rate that I had to go back 4 years in time with to get, but the rates are just so erratic during the pandemic that they're really meaningless for the forecast. And that's a big judgment call. Next slide, please. Okay, this is probably the most important table other than the projected numbers that I'm presenting. It's a complex table. It compares the births in zip code 95132, which is the only zip code entirely in this district, with what showed up in kindergarten 5 years later from that zip code. And the assumption is that the trend that happened within that zip code part of your district probably applies to the rest of the district as well. And if you look back, and when I say 2011 births, that's actually prorated from the last 3 months of 2010, the first 9 months of, the last 4 months of 2010, first 8 months of 2011 to better correlate to kindergarten 5 years later. You'll see that there was 421 births in 2011, and 5 years later, you had 394 BUSD kindergartners from that zip code. That's a 94% correlative ratio. That's a really strong ratio, especially when you consider some kids go off to private schools. That's an amazingly high ratio, actually. In 2012, you had 61 births. In 2013, you had 479. So all the births up there are in the 400s, all the way from 2011 to 2017. So the births didn't change that much. What did change was the correlative ratio 5 years later. It went from 94 to 89 to 88 to 81 to 76, down to 63 last year and just 60% this year. That means 40% of the kids that were born in that zip code 5 years ago did not show up in kindergarten this year. And there's no way that's privates. That's people that moved out of the district. And hopefully we'll get some back, but I don't think we're going to get a lot back. So as you look down below in the column in orange, you'll see that all the birth numbers are in the 300s. We went from a bunch of birth numbers in the upper to in middle 400s to 336, 347, and 332 in the three most recent birth years for 95132. That's down over 20%. It's actually much more significantly than 20%. And that's hard numbers. That's not a forecast. That's what actually was born in that zip code, according to the county health department. So when you go from 479, 461 down to 332 and 336, it's a pretty scary drop-off. And that's really what drives all the kindergarten forecast here. If the current ratio of 60% was repeated with those birth numbers, and I don't think it will, I think it'll be above 60%, you would have totals in that zip code in the next 5 years in the low 200s compared to over 400 in the past. You following me on that? Everybody see where I am? Okay, that's how dangerous those numbers are. I don't think they'll go that low, but they could. Next slide, please. Okay, new housing. The only developments that are suitable to analyze going forward in the forecast within your district are the mainly market rate developments. You really didn't have any below market rate developments built in recent years in the district. And out of almost 2,000 housing units that were built in this district in the last decade, almost all of which are attached, only something like 30 are detached. You're averaging only 7 students in every 100 units. That sounds incredibly low, and it is incredibly low, but I'm finding that all over Silicon Valley. What's happening is they're no longer building 3 and 4 bedroom apartments intended for families. They're building studios and 1 bedrooms and tiny 2 bedroom units intended for singles and childless couples. And it's in other districts actually lower. In the Santa Clara district, it's 1 in every 50 units. In the Orchard district, it's 1 in every 50 units. So you're actually getting 7 in every 100 units. You're getting a little bit better ratio, but still really low. The only slight positive here is with 57 in TK and 51 in 3.5 and only 35 in 6.8. It implies they are young families, so that rate may come up over the first few years of occupation. Everybody following me on that? Mm-hmm. But still, it's probably not getting over 0.1 or 1 student in every 10 units. And that's just what's happening because of what they're building nowadays. You're getting a better result in this county out of below market rate housing, but still not what many people would think. In 4 developments I sampled in the Sunnyvale and Oak Grove districts, those 460 regular below market rate units were averaging essentially 2 kids in every 10 units or 1 student every 5 units. With a distribution that, again, 44 in TK and just 27 in 6.8 implies that the student numbers will come up over time, but it probably will never get above 0.3. That's important because we have 1 major below market rate development that will hit in the next few years. It's a brand new one, which we'll discuss in a minute. I've only listed SRO on there as an FYI. Occasionally, the below market rate developments are these tiny little 325 square foot kitchenette type units, and they don't have kids. but none of those are projected here. Next slide, please. Okay, what I'm projecting is overwhelmingly in the Northwood and Morrill attendance area at first, and then in the later years becomes Vincy Park and Piedmont. But really, for the short term, the whole story's Northwood and Morrill, other than Vincy Park and Morrill for a below market rate development. That is on the north side of Berryessa Road by the flea market. And that was a mainly market rate development in the past. It just shifted 2 months ago, to being 195 regular below market rate units plus 100 market rate units. So that is going to generate more kids than we were expecting in the past for Vincy Park. When we get past up to 2027, I actually think you'll have some growth in Vincy Park as a result of that. You'll see there's some other developments in Vincy Park as well. So if I didn't show you the numbers by attendance area going out 5 years, but 5 years out, both Northwood and Vincy Park could have more kids than now, which means the declining numbers I showed you at the start are that much more concentrated in the rest of the district. Does that make sense to everybody? Next slide, please.
Just 1 second, Tom, on that slide with that, because I know there was a recent article regarding the plans shifting as well to the units from 3,000
Sure.
being reduced down to 1,000.
It's 940. I was projecting 400 of that would occur in 2027 and 2028, which you're seeing there under Vincy Park, Piedmont. And I think that number actually will still hold for the new plan. If anything, you might get a few more units, not a lot more units, but a few more units, because it's going to be easier for them to build townhouses in this market than high-rise buildings. Because when you build a high-rise building, you're taking a loan out for multiple years. And the current interest rates, that's just not economically feasible anymore. So I think about 400 is still the right call. Obviously, as we get beyond 2028, there's only another 500 units left, as opposed to 3,000 units left. So in the long run, we have far less units there. But for the 5-year forecast, I don't think it makes a difference.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Questions? Did I go too fast?
Okay.
So with the, excuse me, so with the current growth projected at Vincy Park and the addition of the new units, are we potentially looking at redistricting that school also in the future, or
Can you go
will
back
that
to
not matter?
the slide that shows the schools? It's table 2. One more. Okay. Vincy Park actually has fewer students now than a couple of years ago. So you've got some room to backfill from that growth. I don't remember what the number was a couple of years ago, but it was a little bit higher than 568. So you have some room for growth, and you'll see that in the short term, I'm actually projecting further decline because you have a big 5th grade graduating out and small kindergarten numbers. But there could be a point still, probably not within 3 years, but in 4 to 5 years, we need to be looking at that. But it's not an immediate issue.
And these, the increase, I mean, the birth, your projections based on birth rates and things like that.
Birth rates and trends through the grades and where the new housing is located.
But we don't consider influx of immigrants or anything like that in this thing, because that's a variable that we cannot control.
I only would consider that if I had a reason to believe the trend of the recent past would change, or in this case, the trend from 2016 to 2019 with some modification. So unless there's a reason to say that pattern is going to stop or greatly accelerate, the built-in grade rates already include that nuisance with some, small deviation up or down over time. I had a case long ago in the Elk Grove School District near Sacramento where a big Laotian group decided to relocate from Fresno to Elk Grove, and apartments went from having like 10 kids to 200 kids overnight. So there are times when you have that hit, but again, in the almost 40 years I've been doing this, there's only a half dozen times I've seen anything like that happen. So. The big issue is just the birth data. It's just scary. And it's not just scary here, it's scary everywhere. I think it's just the price of housing is making it impossible for families to live here in the numbers that they were living here 10 years ago.
Right.
Young families in particular.
And the students that are, the children that are in that chart where you showed the birth rates and the enrollment, so the students are moving out of state is the idea. Do we know where we obviously cannot track them, but is there? Do we have like the data from other states?
Well,
Where we can
yeah, but it's hard to
compare?
know if it's ours. I will say that some markets like Sacramento still have growing numbers. And I think
see.
that's relocating families.
That's where they're probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can share just looking at our own Berryessa data, because we do look at all of our exits and try to see, you know, what's that mobility, where are they headed. And so for this current school year, as we looked at who left us from last school year and didn't continue, what we found was an out-of-state movement. The most popular relocation state was Texas this year. That was the highest number was going to Texas. Last year it was Arizona, Utah. So it varies, you know. This year it was Texas. If they were leaving outside the Bay Area, it was Tracy. That's where we saw a lot of our families go. And then within the Bay Area, we saw a movement just next door to Milpitas.
Interesting, because Milpitas isn't cheap either.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I actually do housing policy in my day job, so this is actually very illuminating to see how housing developments will affect our enrollment. I have a couple of questions for the last slide. I noticed that Brooktree had a significant resident shift, -51, but then isn't Brooktree in that area usually single-family homes? Is that, I'm just wondering like why that shift would be.
Well, again, part of it is the difference between the graduating fifth grade amount and the incoming kindergarten amount. And there is a significant share of middle income detached homes in that attendance area. And although that is a stabilizing kindergarten population relative to the more affordable housing in the district, it still has a much larger amount graduating out of fifth grade. And that got, one more slide, please. Back. Go back to table 2, the first table 2. But it does have some apartments as well. In fact, some of the stuff we shifted out of Northwood into Brooktree was apartments at the north edge of the attendance area. So there's a mix of housing in that attendance area, but the biggest cause of that -51 was a big fifth grade one out.
I see, and around so whenever a student leaves or a family leaves that affordable housing unit, you're noticing that people are not moving it back into that unit? Like it's gonna stay vacant, or what is your?
Well, as I showed in that one slide, it's down something like 22% in the last 3 years. I mean, that's basically more than 1 in every 5 kids in net was gone in K2 in 3 years. Now, obviously, when you're talking about affordable apartments and the recession caused by the pandemic, that's an income level that's got the least amount of money saved to be able to deal with the hit of losing a job. And so a lot of them are just simply had to leave because of economics and the pandemic. If you own your home, you're more likely to be able to hopefully squeeze it out for a few years. But if you're in a very affordable apartment and you're on a marginal income level, you know, losing a job for 6 months, you have to leave. So it's common in that category in all districts during the pandemic.
Ultimately, in your analysis of all of our schools, which schools would you say is top concern for you for their declining enrollment, in your opinion?
Well, if you just look at the rightmost column, and again, this is probably based on the graduating fifth grade numbers, you have 65 going out of Majestic Way. It's falling from 436 to 371. I mean, that's just that's a monumental drop in 2 years. Ruskin is percentage-wise is losing 58. So these are dramatic drop-offs, again, because they have big populations now in 4th and 5th grade, and based on the birth date, I'm expecting much lower income in kindergarten amounts, or even if it's stabilized at the current level, that's still a much smaller amount than is graduating from 4th and 5th grade in those attendance areas. So it's basically just based on where your kids' distribution is. In terms of percentage, I guess it's going to be Ruskin that's the biggest hit. But all those numbers in orange in the right column are pretty significant drop-offs in 2 years.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Williams.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to Report 10B. Dr. Fuentes, can you introduce this?
Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite Mr. Tom Carroll, our Coordinator of Student Services, who will give a presentation regarding positive behavioral intervention support, PBIS, and our district's efforts around addressing chronic absenteeism and our differentiated assistance path. Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
All right, good evening. So tonight I just want to update you with some of the things that we're doing. Thank you. On the student services side of Ed Services. Oh, what do I do? I just hit the button? Oh, no. Down arrow. Got it. Thank you. So first, since the pandemic, we've seen an increase in the need for mental health services for our students. We've seen increased truancy, chronic absenteeism, more behavior concerns arising, less self-regulation, as well as higher needs for our students and families to be connected with community resources. The graph on the right there is the MTSS chart that was pretty standard prior to the pandemic, where with high quality instruction, with clear positive behavior expectations and support, mental health services, approximately 80% of the students in our classrooms are going to be in that green category where they're successful, they're able to achieve, and they're receiving the tier 1 support that they need. Prior to the pandemic, approximately 10 to 15% of our students did not necessarily respond to those initial tier 1 supports, and so they need a little more intervention. And so that's going to be the students who are in the yellow. And with those additional supports, approximately 5 to 10% of our students still needed additional resources on top of that. Since the pandemic, we've almost seen this pyramid flip. And so it is pretty concerning what we're seeing, and part of what we're doing with Ed Services is trying to address these concerns. As a district, we're very heavily invested in positive behavior interventions and supports, as well as multi-tiered systems of support. We currently have 10 schools that are engaged in PBIS training. 5 of those schools went through tier 1 PBIS training at the County Office of Education before the pandemic hit. However, because of the pandemic and closing schools, they did not necessarily get off the ground and running with implementation of their PBIS programs. So therefore, this year they're working with Dr. Mendiola and Collective Impact Solutions to refresh their PBIS systems and structures and to get those implemented throughout the course of this year. Those 5 schools are Majestic, Noble, Ruskin, Toyon, and Piedmont. We also have 4 schools that are involved with their initial tier 1 PBIS training. They're going through that with the County Office of Education right now: Cherrywood, Laneview, Northwood, and Morill. We have 1 school, Summerdale, who was part of that initial cohort who got trained up prior to the pandemic. However, they really have flourished with their PBIS implementation, and they're actually on tier 2. So they're working with the county office right now on a grant to continue with their implementation. And then the 3 schools that we don't have currently involved with PBIS training will most likely be going through that training next year. And that is Brooktree, Sierramont, and Vincy Park. Some of the things that we've implemented this year that we found to so far be successful is the adoption of a district behavior matrix. This was collaborated on with several stakeholders within our district. It was piloted last year at a handful of our schools, I believe Ruskin and Piedmont Middle School, and we're going for initial implementation this year. Although we're implementing it, it is still a work in progress, and we are still going to be getting feedback on how we can continue to develop this matrix to make sure that it is relevant and meaningful for our administrators. But ultimately, the intention is to provide clear and consistent guidelines for addressing student discipline, taking a restorative approach to discipline, and making clear the different tiered behavior interventions that we have available to address behavior as it arises. Something else we've implemented is Suite 360 at our middle schools. It's an online module program that basically allows our administrators to assign, and our counselors, social workers, to assign online modules that are directly related to certain issues that may come up. So for example, if a student is chronically tardy to school, or if they're absent often, they can be assigned a module on the importance of attending school regularly. If a student is doing various behavior concerns, then there are different modules that can be assigned. We've seen that, I believe there's been over 100 of these modules that have been assigned to our students this year, and it's a great alternative to suspension. So just a quick snapshot of where we are. Might not surprise you, but the majority of our suspensions in the district typically happen at the middle school level. So the data that I have here is specifically from our middle schools. But as of October 28th last year, we had 32 suspensions across our 3 middle schools. As of this year, on the same date, we've had 18. So it's approximately a 44% decrease. And I believe that is attributed to several of the interventions that we put in place. Chronic absenteeism continues to be a concern and something that we're trying to address. Chronic absenteeism is defined by having missed 10% or more of the school year, regardless of whether or not it's an excused or unexcused absence. Some of the causes for chronic absenteeism that we've discovered is that there's still the COVID and COVID symptoms, and then just a true lack of understanding about chronic absenteeism. Many of our parents understand that if their student is sick, they should call in. When we look at the number of students who were chronically absent last year, specifically at our elementary schools, the majority of the absences were excused. So the parents are calling in, they're letting us know that their kids aren't at school, but the students still might miss more than 18 or more days in the school year. And so that's where right now we're really trying to push hard to educate our families on the difference between chronic absenteeism and truancy. We have a lot of students who are truant, missing 3 or more days unexcused, but they're not chronically absent. On the flip side, we have a lot of students who are not truant, but they are chronically absent. And as of right now, from the state's standpoint, we're being looked at for our chronic absenteeism, not necessarily our truancy. So we're continuing to try to educate our families on when they should be sending their kids to school and keeping that line of communication open. This is a snapshot of the data comparing the 21-22 school year and last school year with chronic absenteeism. What you'll see on the far right is the difference between the 2 years. And I have to give a huge shout out to Brooktree, Vincy Park, and Toyon, who saw significant decreases in their chronic absenteeism rates. As a whole, Berryessa decreased by 3.5%, which when compared to the county, which increased, I think that's a huge success. And which I did not include on here, but the California rate of chronic absenteeism for 22-23 was 25%. So when compared to the county and to the state, we are doing much better. Because of this data, I'll get into it here in a few minutes, it did cause us to get into differentiated assistance, and I believe that's on the next slide. But some of the things that we're doing to address chronic absenteeism is leveraging our school social workers. We did just receive the School Link Services Grant, which is offered by the Behavioral Health Department, and that will allow us to hire an additional social worker to specifically support our Tier 3 students around absenteeism and mental health needs. And our social workers are continuing also to utilize Care Solace to link our families with outside resources as they need it. We've also recently are in the process of hiring community liaisons. And while the community liaisons are tied to our CSACE plan and really are designed to support our success scholars, many of our success scholars are also students who are chronically absent. And so they will continue to build that positive homeschool interaction. And what's nice too is that they're invested members of the community. They're majority of them are staff members who are already working in our schools, whether it's clerks, media techs, paraeducators. And so they are invested and already know how our systems work. Home visits are huge. We've been really trying to make an effort with getting to families' homes when we feel that's appropriate. And actually on November 29th, we're going to be having a training here at the district office hosted by the county office, specifically on, it's an introduction on how to do effective home visits. We'll be having all of our principals, assistant principals, counselors, social workers, and psychologists join us for that home visit training. And then also, just like everything else we're trying to do, is take a restorative approach to addressing attendance. While there is the need to take it to SARTs and SARBs, and if needed, take it to the district attorney, we really do want to make the conversations positive and reinforce that we want your students at school. We are trying to create that welcoming and affirming environment. So as I stated earlier, we are in differentiated assistance. We just had our last differentiated assistance meeting. We were identified by the state for this because our students with disabilities, the rate of absenteeism for our students with disabilities. Approximately 30% of our students with disabilities were chronically absent. I believe that actually should be the 21-22 school year. I apologize. So we've been working with the county office to engage in cycles of inquiry to see what we could do to possibly make a shift with the students. One of the things that we did, we identified 4 students with disabilities who were chronically absent last year and who, we started this about 11 weeks ago, who at that time had already been chronically absent this year, and seeing what we could do to maybe intervene and make a change. We talked about having the case managers for those students make positive phone calls home, try to engage the parents, understand the root cause of the student's absence, and just really, again, build that homeschool connection. So what we did notice is that over the course of 11 weeks, 3 of the 4 students with those attempts did not miss another day of school. And 1 of those students had only missed 1 day of school in the 11 weeks. So with that, we're going to be, even though we will hopefully be out of differentiated assistance when the data comes out in January, we are going to be working with our principals, our case managers, to try to expand this pool to see what we could do on a greater scale. Do you have any questions?
I have a question. So the previous presentation we just heard, it was suspected that a lot of students have been moving out of the area. So does this data take into account students that have been moving out of the area, but they haven't been removed from our system yet? So essentially, just students that are still considered our students, but they haven't been moved out, but they just don't live in our district. That's why they're not attending schools.
So I would say no. Well, I mean, in terms of the data from last year, I don't know how many of those students have moved out, but in terms of the data that we're pulling for this year and looking at which students, are accounting for these numbers, all of them are our students currently.
And I'll add to that. And so one of the things that we've done is we have, going into this school year, spoken with our principals and are working with our office staff teams to make sure that we are being very quick to contact families when we notice a consistent drop off or they haven't returned back from wherever they are. We do have families that travel up, to another country for a time period. We let them know we're not holding seats because it goes into this chronic absenteeism cycle, and that they will be dropped, but when they return, we will re-enroll because they were still on the books in the past, and that accounted for some of that data. But we're trying to be more proactive about that this year. So we're just cleaning that up as quickly as we can.
And actually, now that I think about it, we do actually have 1 student that I can think of at one of our middle schools who has missed, I think she only attended the first day of school. We've been trying to make efforts to get her. We found out that she's actually living in another district. At this point, we are trying to work with the family and Franklin McKinley to get her enrolled over there. However, we don't want to just drop her from our system, because if we drop her and she's not picked up at another school, then it counts as a dropout for our district. So we also want to be careful to avoid that.
Right, because every school district is accountable to ensure continuity of education for that student, even when they leave. So that's why when a parent exits our district, we ask, where are they moving to, where they're enrolling. So there's an exchange of educational information,
Right.
and we know that that learning plan continues for them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's just one of my concerns because I know there are a lot of families that move out of the district and then they keep their students at home because they just are either too busy or they're not familiar with the process of re-enrolling their students into their new home district. So as long as we have some sort of a resource available to assist those families, I think there was some social workers that would do outreach to them.
Yep, there's social workers, the community liaisons.
Okay.
If it is a student with special, with disabilities, case managers, school psychologists, site administrators. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Yes. Just some clarifying questions on the behavior metrics and the student discipline part of the. So, can you expand, maybe clarify a little bit more on the where it says clear and consistent guidelines for addressing student discipline? How is it being handled? Because some of the feedback that we've received is if a student is being disruptive or disrespectful in the classroom, causing disruption for learning for everybody, the teacher in the classroom refers the student, but some of the student comes back, and there is no transparency as to what's happening in that interim. The teacher doesn't seem to know what transpired on the other side. So I'm just trying to understand whether that process has buy-in from all the teaching staff and what is being done by the administrator or whoever is handling the case to rectify the student behavior, because the feedback we're getting is student comes back with the same kind of behavior, right? It's not, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
And it's causing, it could potentially cause learning loss for not just that student, but for everybody else in the classroom, cause stress for the teachers and things like that. It has a cascading effect, as we know.
Right.
So I'm just trying to understand if you have any additional data to expand on that, how that process is, and how we are ensuring that our teachers are buying into that process and also being trained on what the expectation should be and things like that.
Well, so the idea of the behavior matrix is that it does outline all of the different education code violations. It provides a variety of responses that could be taken. Much of the discipline is at the discretion of the administrators. Ideally, we want tier 1 interventions to be happening in the classroom. We understand that there's times where a student needs to be removed, but really every student needs to be in the classroom. They need to be getting their education. And so with I think it's important to also realize that behavior is a direct result of a student need. And so sometimes the traditional approach to discipline is not necessarily what that student needs at that time. We see that suspending the students, removing them from the class is not necessarily effective and does not work for students. It's not going to change behavior. And so that's where our administrators are still continuing to work with our teachers on how we can address behaviors within the classroom. And in terms of buy-in, again, this is something that's constantly developing. I said it's a work in progress. So we are moving to seek feedback on how we can continue to develop this and make it as effective as possible.
And I'll add to that as well, because I think in addition to buy-in, the other thing you're alluding to is communication, right? That feedback loop of what's occurring. So that way the classroom teacher knows that whatever the strategy was implemented happened during that in-between time. And that's what we're working on. As Mr. Carroll shared, it's a work in progress. We currently have our MTSS district executive leadership team. And those are the issues that we're discussing. We have some of our members here in the audience that are part of those conversations. And we acknowledge that there's still a lot of communication that needs to happen district-wide to share this work and the path that we're on in terms of trying to address not just academic needs of students, but these behavioral needs as well. And just this past week, we had, on Monday, we had our executive leadership team meeting, and the focus was communication. And how do we put all of these plans that we've been working on together so that it can be expressed to everyone, not just our teachers, but we have support staff in the classrooms as well with our teachers. So everyone knows like what's our mission and what's driving us and what are the resources that everyone has or will have at their fingertips to try to support these situations. It is a shift. There's a lot of communication we need to do, and we're building that. And actually, our next meeting in December, we're bringing that communication package back so then we can share it district-wide. So that was what we just discussed this week. And that's part of that building in that ownership for everyone and explaining the rationale behind it too, because there's been, as we mentioned in our previous board meeting, lots of recent legislation that is changing how discipline is being addressed with students, that we also need to be sure we're meeting those regulations, and all the research that's out there that shows, you know, what is where do students make the most gain, and that's what's being looked at also, you know, through these initiatives.
Right. So all my concern is about the entirety of the classroom or the entirety of the school. So if a student behavior is not changing after repeated attempts, what is the mitigation plan? Because at that point, there is learning loss for pretty much everybody, right?
Right.
And then that causes stress on the educator, on the support staff, whoever is handling the situation, and that kind of demoralizes, kind of takes away that kind of excitement of coming to work to teach, saying that I'm not being effective, that the student doesn't seem to make any improvements, so it's causing me problems with my other students that are wanting to learn, but I'm not able to provide that.
And this process is a progressive process. And so with MTSS, there's multiple tiers. There's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, depending on where the student needs go. So as you said, if behavior continues, that's part of what this matrix is about, in addition to more so for those that might need more, right? Depending on what's going on, if it's counseling intervention, if it's at-home services, you know, if it's a change of placement in the classroom environment. What's important is that from the initial event, whatever that looks like, is that documentation and those conversations with the family. So that way we're ensuring that the student is moving from the different levels of support from 1, 2 to 3. But we always make sure we try to keep them in the most least restrictive environment with as much support as possible. But that's not always going to be what they need, right? But we have to have lots of data that shows what is that right path for that student. And you know, so that documentation is key in each of these incidents as we're working with each student and their family.
Thank you.
I just quickly want to say thank you so much. PBIS is so important. And as you know, I always ask our principals, how are they implementing PBIS? Like, what are you working on? And I really loved what you said that, you know, when a student is acting out, we want to figure out what the root cause is. And I really believe that to be true. They just need additional intervention. So just thank you so much for your work and your presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Carroll. Let's move on to 10C now. Dr. Fuentes.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite Tony Conestab, our Director of Bond Facilities, to provide his monthly bond update on Measure L and Measure U.
Hello, everyone. Again, we'll give you an update on Measure L and Measure U. Again, our first picture is our new gym at Piedmont. It's almost there. We'll go through Measure L. I'll give you an update of kind of what we're going to do, and then Measure U. Again, for Measure L, we've actually completed all our projects. So at the next board meeting, we'll give you how we're going to spend. I think we have about a remaining $150,000. I mean, we've already kind of have projects for another 150, but there's about 150 left that we'll figure out what we're going to do with. Measure U, again, we completed this last month, the Ruskin doors, the ornamental doors at the front. There's 3 sets of doors. I have a picture of those. The exhaust fan project, phase 1 for the exterior. We've done Majestic Way, Summerdale, Vincy Park, Sierramont. Also, Brooktree, Noble, Northwood, and Piedmont have all been completed. The exterior door numbers projects, Noble has been completed. Progress, what we're working on right now is, again, the gym. As of today, it looks like I was told the gym will, they think the gym's going to be done the 21st of December. So I know last week they told us power was we were going to have permanent power on the 15th of this month. And I was told today, now it's going to be the 29th. So that's 2 weeks. So somewhere in December we'll be done. The good news is we actually did get the mechanical unit. That's actually going to be set on the roof on Monday. And they're actually paving the fire access road on Friday when school's off. So those are 2 big things. The Morel exterior door project, they're actually complete. They're just trying to finish all the punch list things. They're going to be working Friday. And then if they have anything left to do, they'll do that over Thanksgiving. Again, the exhaust fan project, the only school that we actually have left is Morel, and we have 1 fan to finish. Fire alarm replacement, Brooktree, Majestic Way, Noble, Summerdale, those are all moving along. Majestic Way is actually almost complete. And then the play area or the play field at Ruskin, that was seeded, and I think we're just waiting to see how it turns out at this point. And next is exterior door numbers. We have all these projects. The biggest holdup with these is now the vendor can't get materials. So they're having hard times getting the reflective materials for the numbers. Things we're going to bid this month. I think everything bids on the 28th of November. The Piedmont District Office, the roofing and HVAC replacement, exhaust fan replacement phase 2, which is the remaining 4 schools, which is Cherrywood, Laneview. I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. Cherrywood, Laneview, Ruskin, and Toyon. And then lighting, LED lighting replacement at Ruskin and the MPR and Laneview and the MPR. And then also we have an alternate for the lights in the classrooms at Cherrywood. Again, in design, we still have Toyon, Vincy Park, Northwood, that's moving forward. The warehouse replacement project, we're moving forward on that. Again, exterior signs, we're working on that. The next set of PA and security projects are, again, 7 schools, and then the exterior window replacement at Piedmont. And then pictures, again, this is the latest picture of the gym about 2 weeks ago. So it's looking pretty good inside. Again, what they have to do inside is finish the main hoops and then put in the floor. And they were working on some of the low voltage things. But the good thing is that I didn't mention is we actually have everything. We're not waiting for anything anymore. Now we're just waiting for labor to actually put it in. Again, this is the opposite view of the gym. Again, kind of the side view. Again, this is the main access road for the fire lane. And then these are the doors at Ruskin. So again, on the left-hand side were the old doors, red doors, and the right-hand side, we put in one basically big ornamental gate. And then the following is just a schedule of how we are going to complete everything. And then this is just the opposite side of the gym. Do we have any questions?
Good.
So on the 150K you have for Measure L, will you be bringing up some suggestions, or are you looking for us to bring up some suggestions?
Well, no, we'll have some suggestions on how to spend the money.
Okay.
Anything else? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you for your report.
Thank you.
We'll move on to your report, Dr. Fuentes.
First, I would just like to say our schools across the district have really kicked off the fall and all of the wonderful holidays we have to come with fantastic community events these past few weeks. Everything's been celebrated with fall festivals, Halloween parades, Dia de los Muertos celebration at Noble, the Diwali celebration today at Summerdale. It's really wonderful to see, our schools celebrate the diversity that we have across the Berryessa community, and nice to just have that good spirit, back. It's been a long, long time since we've had full scale, events with our community, and we have certainly seen that this school year. So just a lot of fun to attend these past few weeks, and I just wanted my hats off to, our school staff, the site principals, and their PTAs, and all of the parents that are involved volunteering, being part of, all of the family fun for the students. It's been a great joy to be a part of that. The other thing I wanted to share was a congratulations to Vincy Park Elementary. They were recognized this past month as the best public school in the online Metro Silicon Valley publication. So that's a great thing. That's really by poll voting, right? Just so whether it was their Vincy Park community, their parents at large, whoever went online and said, yes, we love our school, Vincy Park, surfaced as number one. So a great recognition for them, and the pride that their community has for, what their school offers. So that was really exciting. Also, just to share, we do have an upcoming holiday, so there will be no school this Friday in honor of our veterans. So I just want to give my thanks to all of our veterans here in the audience, our veterans within our community. We thank them for their dedicated service to our country. And certainly we have our Thanksgiving holiday that's around the corner, and just want to give my gratitude to our trustees and your leadership, and to our community at large. We have a wonderful place here in Berryessa, and so my thanks to all of them, and wishing everyone a wonderful upcoming holiday with their families.
Thank you for your presentation and report. Are there any comments or announcements from the board?
Yes, I have something. Just wanted to quickly, I won't take too much time. Just wanted to quickly let everybody know that this month, or the past month, we kicked off the Slow Down San Jose campaign at our schools. So I wanted to request the district to, Dr. Fuentes, to cascade that information to all schools, and what to expect, and how to implement it. We are looking for support from our PTAs to try to have a table at any of their events, to get some pledges going, to have parents pledge to slow down around schools. Just as a little bit of a background, even when I was not on the board as a community member, I always wanted to have safety around the perimeter of the schools, not just the school itself as part of the school site plan. But for obvious reasons, it cannot be implemented because it's resource intensive. So we're glad to have partnership with San Jose City DOT. We had walk and roll. We are a walk and roll school district. So we depend on these partnerships to implement some of those ideas to make our school sites safer. And slow down campaign is a very important one. So we should have that information cascaded to all our sites, so they all know what to expect. And definitely they can contact you or our contact at the city to understand what needs to be done. And just as to let everybody know, please slow down. I work as a volunteer crossing guard at Cherrywood. Please don't run me over. I know, you may not like what I say, but I'm just trying to get kids crossing the road. That's all I'm trying to do. So slow down. look for kids. Like I tell my parents at Cherrywood, our job doesn't end as soon as our kid gets out of this of our cars. It doesn't give us the freedom to just take off, or just pick up the phone and start texting away. Safety is all of our responsibility, and drive as if your child is in the crosswalk is what I say. If your child is crossing the crosswalk, would you be speeding down the street? You wouldn't. So that's what I tell my all the parents at Cherrywood, and I'd appreciate that message going to all the sites.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a reminder to our families and anyone that's watching us, because we did put the link in our last newsletter, and we've been putting it out in social media, and we'll continue to do that. And as a friendly incentive, what we're asking all of our parents and staff to do is sign that pledge that you will slow down when you're around a school. And the city, in partnership, will be doing monthly raffles. So based on your pledge sign up, so they've got great prizes. So if you want to have a chance, be sure to sign that pledge and commit to slowing down.
Are there any other comments or announcements from other board members? All right, if there's none, we'll move on to our first review and action item, A1. Dr. Fuentes, can you introduce this item?
Yes, it is recommended the board review and approve Board Policy 0410, non-discrimination in district programs and activities, for a first reading. This is an update to our policy based on a new law, AB 1078, 2023. This was put in place by recently by Governor Newsom to ensure that the district's policy prohibits any discrimination, harassment, intimidation, and bullying when it comes to applying or enacting any policies and procedures in adoption of instructional material requirements. So we are bringing this forth as a first reading based on current legislation requirements.
All right, thank you for that. Is there any discussion or motion on this item?
I so move.
Second. Go ahead.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of this motion, say aye. Aye. Okay, that's 5-0. Motion passes. We'll move on to B1. Dr. Fuentes, can you introduce this?
It is recommended the board approve the comprehensive school safety plans for all of our elementary and,
B1.
oh, I'm sorry, yes. Oh, here we go, sorry. B1, Measure A, it is recommended the board appoint community member Yanet Segura Herrera to the Measure A committee. I know she was here earlier. Did she have to leave? Okay. So is it best that we bring this item back, or can we move forward? Do we have a statement from her in terms of her application?
Her statement was in her application, which was shared with the board.
Do we have a copy, or is it attached?
It's attached right now. No, it's not attached. It's confidential.
Okay, well, I will say if the board is open to moving forward with this item, it is recommended that we appoint Ms. Segura to this committee. I can share on her behalf her level of involvement and commitment to our district. She's a very active parent of ours. She has children at Brooktree as well as at Morrill Middle School. She's an active PTA parent, has held president positions, is currently on the North Valley Council PTA Executive Board. She's involved in our Budget Stabilization Committee. She has participated in our District Advisory Council in the past, so certainly keeps herself well informed of district issues and and seeks clarification when needed. So I would strongly encourage her ability to be able to be part of this committee as she desires.
Janet is a well-known community member. I've worked with her also. So she's a very passionate parent. So I emphatically move to approve her appointment.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any other questions? If not, let's go ahead and take a vote. All in favor of this, say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries 5-0. We'll now move on to B2. Dr. Fuentes.
Thank you. It is recommended the board approve the comprehensive school safety plans for our elementary and middle schools, as well as our district office. I know we have provided those comprehensive safety plans to you to review. We have Dan here who takes the lead in ensuring that those plans meet all of the compliance components. One of the things that I will share with the board is we will be bringing these plans back again, most likely in the month of January, because there's another new law that recently passed this past month. But we need to meet the October requirements or the March requirements. We're going to do this initial review, which is based on our past regulations. But the new law, which goes into effect in January 2024, we need to add additional language on how we would address potential overdose or drug use situations of students. We need to have a plan of action. I would like to share with the board, we're ahead of the game. Just last month, we had all of our district leadership team, all of management were trained in being able to disseminate Narcan in that event. We also have that medication on site in all of our AED lock boxes. So that will definitely be part of a component to that implementation process. Dan?
All right. Good evening, everybody. I just want to give you guys a quick overview of the safety plan purpose and the requirements. So the California Education Code outlines the requirements of all K through 12 schools with regards to writing and developing a school safety plan relevant to the needs and resources of the particular school. It is the intent of the district to develop a mandated comprehensive safety plan detailing the systematic planning process, including strategies aimed at the prevention of the education about potential incidents involving crime and violence on school campuses. So the comprehensive school safety plans must include the following elements: assessment of school crime committed on school campuses and at school-related functions, child abuse reporting procedures, disaster procedures, suspension and expulsion policies, procedures to notify teachers of dangerous pupils, discrimination and harassment policies, school-wide dress code policies, procedures for safe ingress and egress, policies enacted to maintain a safe and orderly environment, rules and procedures on school discipline, and the last, hate crime reporting procedures. So a brief timeline of how our school safety plans were developed this year included me updating the initial plan and sending those out to principals on September 11th. Basically, I sent them out. All of our safety plans are on a Google Doc, so it's a living document. We could make updates and adjustments as we need. From there, principals were able to share the 23-24 school site safety plan with their site council in order to update the sections they're responsible for. This includes safety concerns that have brought up. For example, damaged fencing or issues with traffic patterns, before and after school drop off, the slowdown event, all that good stuff. Physical and social climate goals are developed and documented by each school and then shared with their respective communities. Most common physical goals concentrate on emergency preparedness, earthquake drills, fire drills, etc. Most common social climate goals detailed around social emotional needs of students. Updated documents then came back to me for approval from the BUSD Safety Committee, as well as signatures from the San Jose Fire Department and the San Jose Police Department. So I meet with them. They come to the MOT conference room. I lay them all out. We read through them. And I've developed those relationships with the fire department and the police department so they understand what they're signing. And then the last step is to present at the board and get Dr. Fuentes' signature and the board president's signature. So with that said, on behalf of the BUSD Safety Committee, I present you the safety plans for 22, 23, 24. Any questions?
Anything from the board? No. Thank you for putting this together. I know it's a lot of work every year. It takes a lot of stakeholders' input. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Now, is there a motion to approve or motion for this item?
I move for approval.
Okay.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of this item, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. We'll now move on to item B3. Dr. Fuentes, can you introduce this?
It is recommended the board approve the use of the Apple Inc. PEPPM contract number 535801-001 piggyback agreement for the purchase of Apple Inc. computers, tablets, accessories, and services for initial term of 3 years.
Any questions or motions on this
Is it,
item?
sorry, is it coming from the bond program, this one, or yeah, the funding for this is?
So this is the contract that allows us to buy Apple products at
Right.
a standard price over the next 3 years,
Okay,
right? So when we go in, we actually purchase from their e-commerce site, and this just sets the price according to this contract for the next 3 years.
okay. And the funds, Dr. Fuentes?
So those funds could come from a variety of sources. They could
I
come
see.
from bond, they could come from the general fund. It's all dependent upon the use of that computer within the district.
Oh, I see, where the computer is actually
Yes,
placed. I see.
correct.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. I move to approve the contract agreement.
I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of this motion, say aye. Aye. Okay, and it's 5-0. Motion carries. We'll move on to B4 now.
It is recommended the board first conduct a public hearing on the disclosure of the Teamsters Local 150 collective bargaining agreement, and second, accept and certify the disclosure of the Teamsters Local 150 collective bargaining agreement from the Santa Clara County Office of Education.
Okay, so at this time, the board will now open it up to a public hearing. Are there any comments in regards to this item from the public? If there's none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Now, is there a motion to accept and certify the disclosure of the Teamsters Local 150 collective bargaining agreement from the Santa Clara County Office of Education?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to C1 now.
It is recommended the board approve the contract language changes in the tentative agreements with Teamsters Local 150. I would also just like to express on behalf of the district our thanks for the collaboration with Teamsters leadership, Alan DeRay and Johnny Salgado and Melinda, who were all part of working with us to come to this positive closure.
Okay, I just also want to echo the partnership that the Teamsters Union Local 150 had with us. They were the first bargaining group that came to an agreement with us this year. So again, I would like to thank them for that. Now, is there a motion for this item?
Move to approve?
Second. Yep.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, that's 5-0. Motion carries. We'll now move on to D1.
It is recommended the board approve the Measure U Bond Implementation Plan Project List, update dated November 8, 2023.
Okay, any questions or discussion on this item?
Do we go through the list of priorities or?
We do not have a presentation,
Oh.
but you
Is-
do have the listing there
Okay.
ahead of you. It is not, it's all of our existing projects from the past that continue to be moving forward. And then in the red are areas of projects that are moving forward from Project 2 list that can advance because now we have some additional savings that we can put towards those efforts. So there's not too many. A lot of them are structural in nature, additional fencing, additional security measures, things of that nature. The most significant project on that list is the warehouse rebuild as a result of the fire that disseminated that entire workspace.
I actually wanted to ask, is the restroom signage for all gender restrooms going to be coming this school year, or are we going to be following the state law where it can roll out, I think, 2 years? I just wanted to ask how that is going.
So we're actually, as part of the signage projects with the schools, we're trying to add those at the same time.
Okay, great. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, is there any other questions or discussion or motion on this item?
I'll move to approve.
All right,
Second then.
it's been moved and seconded. If there's no other questions or discussion, let's take a vote. All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's 5-0. Motion carries. We'll now move on to D2. Dr. Fuentes?
It is recommended the board approve the IT Management Corporation, Inc. request to use CMAS contract 32302-1038 with Verkada, Inc. for security alarm equipment and CMAS contracts 31870-0019Q and number 31870-0019R with IT Management Corporation, Inc. for low voltage cabling and security alarm equipment installation at Piedmont and Morrell Middle Schools.
All right, any questions from the board? Or a motion from the board?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries 5-0. We'll now move on to D3.
It is recommended the board approve the IT Management Corporation, Inc. request to use CMAS contract 32302-1028 with Single Wire, Inc. for public address system software licensing supplies and equipment, and CMAS contracts number 32301-1009, number 31870-0019Q, and number 31870-0019R with IT Management Corporation, Inc. for network programming services, low voltage cabling, and IT equipment installation.
All right,
Is this across all sites? It doesn't show specific site.
So the network optimization is across all sites,
All sites.
but it's also adding the PA systems at Morrell and Piedmont. So this will allow us in the future to actually go from school to school and do it during the year.
Oh,
So we don't have to do it over the summer.
wait, move to approve.
I'll second that.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries 5-0. Now, are there any requests for staff follow-up or items for future agendas from board members? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn then?
Move to adjourn.
Okay. All in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. Okay, meeting's adjourned at 9:07 PM. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.